we're going to talk a little bit about reading strategies. So a word to know is metacognition, and metacognition basically means thinking about your own thinking. So instead of just having passing thoughts and letting them go by the wayside, really take a minute to be present and to be mindful and to focus on the thoughts that are going through your mind. So when we're applying this to an academic setting, something that that various researchers have found about good readers is that they focus when they read. So they're not just letting their eyes scan over the page and then afterwards having no idea what they read. They're not just decoding, like making sure that they can physically read the words and know how to pronounce them. That might be considered good when you're very young and you're learning to read, but ultimately we move past that stage. Good readers stop to assess their understanding rather than just charge through a chapter and then put the book away. They stop periodically to make sure they really know what's going on. And they do things like build on what they already know, question the text, wonder, predict, and a whole bunch of strategies that we're going to look at. So one of those strategies is to make connections. The goal here is to activate your prior knowledge. Think about how this connects to what you already know. What does it remind you of? You can connect this to your own life, to another text that you have read before, or to the world in general. So it might be like, this reminds me of, or this makes me think of. A second reading strategy is to visualize. This is where we picture the setting, the characters, the action, or the plot of the story, objects, processes, or events that are described, anything that makes it seem more real. So if you were annotating, for example, you might write what it makes you picture, but you might also sketch. Sketching can be a good way to activate the other side of your brain and to help you draw more connections. A third strategy is to wonder. So wonder freely, ask questions about your reading, ponder what is off the page. So if you're reading about a character, you might wonder how the author came up with that or how they were able to describe them in such a way. You might wonder if it's based on a real person, right? It's not bad to wonder. It doesn't mean that you're overly distracted. If it has to do with what you're reading, then that's positive. It means you're interacting with the text and you're more likely to remember it later. Another strategy is to make predictions. So we use what we already know, what clues we see in the text, any pictures, any chapter headings, anything that might give us clues, and we make a prediction. So based on what I have read so far, I predict that the character is going to do this next, or I think it's going to be a happy or a sad ending. Whatever it is, that again shows that you're reading critically because you're looking for evidence in what you have read that gives you some indication of what is to come later. Another strategy is feelings. So thinking about how the text makes you feel. Emotional and intellectual involvement spark ideas. So when you think about it, like, are you sad, surprised, happy, silly? Are you in disbelief? And if so, what does that then indicate? So for example, if you are, let's say, watching an ad on TV and it has a bunch of perhaps mistreated animals, and maybe the point of the ad is to get you to donate money or to adopt an animal from a shelter, to in some way reach out to animals who aren't having the best lives at this point, right? If you watch the beginning clips of all these little sad animals and it makes you feel sad or it makes you feel indignant that this is happening in the world, and you identify that feeling, then you're able to see, hey, why would the creators of this ad want me to feel that way? Because it is spurring us on to action, right? It's a persuasive strategy. So part of feelings is identifying how you feel and why the creator of that text or that media wants you to feel that way. But another way of looking at feelings is identifying how the characters feel. If a character is lashing out at someone? Could it be because they are hurt or they are afraid? And so identifying how they feel helps us to further analyze the text. Another strategy is to make inferences to interpret the text. So you want to compare what you're reading to actual real life experiences, and that helps us to gain meaning beyond just what's written on the page. So you might infer that a character is acting the way they are because you can infer that they had a past experience that led them to react in this particular manner. You can infer that the parent is pushing their child to work hard in school because they know from past experience how beneficial that is or would have been for them personally, right? You're able to identify character motives and to kind of read between the lines. The seventh strategy is to sum up. So this is how we kind of check our understanding as we read, particularly when we are doing nonfiction, but also sometimes with fiction. It's helpful to keep track of and focus on important information and put that in your own words. If you can't do that, then maybe you need to reread it and you didn't understand it well enough the first time. And that's okay, right? But stopping to sum up is a good personal check-in to make sure that you really know what's going on in the text that you're reading. So for annotations, I suggest stopping every paragraph or every few paragraphs and making a quick note of the main idea of that section of text. Sometimes when you're reading a novel, if you know that you're going to be doing an assignment with it later where you might need evidence from a particular part, it can be helpful to keep a reading log with just a sentence or two about each section of text or each chapter, so that if you need to go back and find evidence, you can look at your notes to identify which part you might be able to find that in. And the last strategy we'll talk about today is clarifying. So you want to determine what's unclear to you, and then ask questions and use clarifying strategies to gain understanding. You can sound out words, you can use context clues, you can reread it, you can use a glossary or a dictionary, you can refer to anything else, any other texts or notes that you have on that topic, right? So sometimes while you're reading, you might just write a question in the margins. And that's a reminder that maybe you need to follow up on that if you get to the end and you haven't found out the answer. Is it important enough to go ask someone? It could be, right? And then you have a record and you don't forget what questions you had as you were reading. Might also be that mentally you have a question like, I don't know what that word means. And then you use some of these strategies to identify the meaning, and then you might write down a definition or something. All of those are good things to do while you're reading. So this applies to anything that you're reading, anytime you're annotating. These are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about. Remember, you want to use metacognition and think about your thinking. Identify the thoughts that are passing through your mind that are going to help you to understand things. Sometimes while we're reading, let's say a mystery, something might occur to you like, oh, that was kind of a weird thing that he just did there. And then you forget about it and you move on and you get to the end and you're like, oh, I should have figured out that he's the one who did the crime or whatever. I did have that thought, but then, you let it go, right? The more that you really think about your thinking and don't let all of those thoughts just fly right out, the more likely you are to get better at predicting future events and really fully understanding the text.